This is a very, very beautiful village. I'm in South Harting today, and I'm continuing with my Sussex Border walk, exploring the border around Sussex. And in my previous episode, I was walking through the southern part of Lady Holt Park. The northern part, which is on the border between Sussex and Hampshire, takes you down, well, actually just a little to the west. The border is a little to the west of South Harting, where I am, the village now. And so I've come in because this, I think, is at this point the last of the towns before you get into the next part of the border, which I think if you follow it along, you end up in Rake. And I may well go there. I'll have a look at the map later on. I'm starting this video by this church here, St Mary's. Now, I made a video a couple of years ago with a very lovely gentleman called Andrew Shaxton, who is a local historian, and we go inside and we look at a lot of the internal interesting features, such as the effigies, the tombstones. We look at, I think, the Carroll family. There's a tombstone in there which I believe the Carrolls were at Lady Holt, the house in Lady Holt Park. Oh, and I found out some information since. In my last episode I was wondering about who Lady Holt was. Well, it seems Lady Holt wasn't a person at all. Holt is an old name for a raised woodland, and of course you have the South Downs and the raised hills at the back. Harting Down, in fact, is just to the south of the village. And why Lady? Well, it's the Holt, the woodland, the raised woodland of Our Lady. So that gives you Lady Holt. And there was a house from around I think from the Stuart period, really, 1600, somewhere around there, Charles, and in that era, and eventually it was razed to the ground in the late 16th century. Some other fantastic information, I'll tell you about that shortly. But this is an absolutely remarkable church with this very distinct copper spire. When I came here today in my lovely van, I came, of course I live in Worthing in Sussex, and I came across towards Chichester and then north, not quite following the path that I have actually walked in sections, but as I came up, you come to the top of the down here, and the first thing you see is this beautiful green copper spire sticking out, pinpointing this amazing village and of course the church. And I understand the village is a Saxon village, settlements here very early, no doubt from spring waters that came from the Downs. However, I said I'd give you a little bit more information about Lady Holt. You may remember in the last episode I was telling you about the terrible murder that took place, the Galley and Chater murder by the Hawkhurst gang. Well, it resonated for miles around, as you can imagine, in 1748 when this took place. And Lady Holt House, the Carroll family who were living there, it really had some effect because it was soon after that the house was actually razed to the ground. Chater was thrown down a well, Harris's well. Turns out that in this area there are 7 wells altogether. Lady Holt well, which is a different well from the one that Chater was thrown down, presumably was up at the house somewhere, at the site of the house. It was 240 foot deep. That's very deep. Presumably to get down to the water table. And in order to pull the water up, there was a massive wheel, 12 foot in diameter and 6 foot wide. I imagine that they had a donkey or some animal in there, presumably a donkey, to turn the wheel in order to draw up all the water that a large family like the Carrolls would have needed. So yes, 7 wells, and that being the deepest. Absolutely staggering. I don't know if it's still there. I don't know if there's any remnants of there. I certainly wouldn't want to fall down that one. What an amazing secluded graveyard behind these terrific large walls. It just goes to show how important this space must have been to have built these beautiful walls that are now weathered with lichen and thyme and the odd brambles on the top. Absolutely amazing, but just incredibly laid out. And in the background, the church. I don't know if you can hear that chiming, just to add to the wonderful atmosphere. And then in the distance there, I think that must be Harting Down, part of it. And the road I came down would have sort of circumnavigated round. Just looking south here, down towards the downs, beautiful view on this rather gorgeous January as I film. I think, if I've got this right, looking at an old history of South Harting as I did just before I came out, it was, as I say, a Saxon village. And then during the Norman times, I believe the Barons of Hussey, which I think is it's a French name or a Normandy name based on a place in Normandy or France. Hussey, I'm not even going to attempt to do the French version of it. The Barons of Hussey came and rebuilt the old Saxon church, which was probably, if stone, very small and probably just timber. I imagine there was plenty of wood around in here as we get away from the downs. Well, a number of the Hussey family would have lived here over the years, and in fact, because of I suppose animosities with different barons, different members of the countryside, as ever there was back in those times, I believe in 1266 Henry Hussey, one of the descendants of the originals, had a license from the king to build a house, a manor house, to enclose it with a stone wall and a ditch, and to crenellate, or to embattle it. And I read the words also to have the terror of a prison or dungeon, which does sound rather gruesome. I don't know where that is. I was looking on old maps as well before I came, scouring around, trying to find where possibly the old manor house was. I don't know. Later on, we had the Carrolls, as I say, up there at Lady Holt. And then towards the end of the Carrolls' time, we had Up Park, which is also up there on Harting Down. And of course, a lot of people know Up Park and have visited it. So the whole place steeped in a lot of history, and you see that particularly reflected in some of the houses down the main high street. Let's go back and have a look at some of them. There's some very beautiful houses, I have to say, and I imagine that you need a fair bit of money if you were thinking of buying into such a wonderful village. However, apart from the traffic which is running through and not really stopping, apart from perhaps later on at the White Hart pub with its public loos nearby, I haven't really seen any people. I've been here a couple of hours now, just running around looking at things, and yeah, it's amazingly quiet. So if you've got the cash and you want to retire somewhere very quiet and you don't mind a bit of through traffic on the way to Petersfield, then this can be the perfect place. And it looks like you'll just have no end of fascinating history to explore. Well, this is rather fantastic, isn't it? The old village water pump for pumping up water. So I guess there must have been a well here of some description. I can't quite read what it says on the front of this, but wonderful to see this monument still here and right in front of the old schoolhouse as well. Beautiful. There's a cottage here just behind me. It's got on the frontage 1684. It looks a very lovely place to live, but it's right on the corner here of the road. But above there's this post. It says on the front Starboard Cottage, but the post says that it must have been a pub at one time. I've now returned back to the church. I'm taking a footpath which heads north to a very ancient site, and in doing so it looks like I'm going to be going through Church Farm. Well, I've come a little away from Church Farm now, to the north. The sun very bright in my face, as you can see. And up here, the hill, an ancient hill with an ancient Iron Age hill fort on, Torbury Hill. Torbury as in B-E-R-R-Y, as in the berries you pick. On old maps I think it's still called Torbury. But reading the history of South Harting, I read that it was known as Tarbury. But Tor, because Tor is, well, the peak, as in the Tors at Dartmoor and places like that, I don't know why Bury. But up there, now unfortunately, I've looked around, there are no public footpaths to get up there to go on it, which is a real pain, because I'd love to go up the top. So I'm just going to circumvent because I want to try and get to another point behind in which there's an unusual ghost story. Just passing halfway now behind the hill here, Torbury Hill, and I can just make out the ramparts of the old Iron Age hill fort with my naked eye, but unfortunately I don't have with me a long lens to attach to the camera to zoom in, and I can barely see it. I'm heading north, so I think to my east, this little settlement here must be East Harting. I assume that's what it is. And I know that for about 40 years, apparently, the Reverend Gilbert White from Selborne, famed for the first man of ecology, his book of natural history, that he was the squire, apparently, here for something like 40 years. At East Harting. And of course I forgot to mention that South Harting is associated with people such as, well, the TV presenter Cliff Mitchellmore, who's buried in there, Eric Gill, the sculptor. I believe he actually sculpted the war memorial we saw at the beginning. H.G. Wells has a link to Up Park, and Bertram Russell, to name but a few. I have now circumnavigated even around Torbury Hill, and the fort is just to my left at this moment. There's a farm, some sunshine. I'm in lee of the shadows here, and it's very cold. It's quite slippery on the road as well. I don't know if this is the exact spot. It may be the bit on the main road. I've got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. I've picked this because it's quite remote for my red ghost story. So H.D. Gordon wrote a history of Harting in something in the late 19th century. I forget now. I've got it on this bit of paper here. 1877, there you go. And I've got this because I want to get this quote quite right. He says, here, there was a point, Torbury Corner, where those who laid violent hands upon themselves were buried. I don't really get what that means. Those who laid violent hands upon themselves were buried. Not upon others, but on themselves. I can't imagine it meant they beat each other up, but it's possibly here on the roadside or on the other main road where the bodies are buried. Anyway, supposedly ghosts. And this goes back in, I don't know, sometime in the early 18th century, possibly earlier. A man was coming back from Petersfield, and he saw a dark apparition in the dead of night. He got down onto his onto his knees, and he started to recite the Lord's Prayer. And as he got to the end, he looked up, and this apparition, this strange spectre, still came to him. In abject fear, he squinted at it, only to discover it was a donkey. A great story. Well, I now am going to circumnavigate back to the main road and then back to South Harting, where I've parked my van, nearly said car again, on the summit of the hill fort, which I believe is now owned by Brereton Estates. I saw a sign earlier. There's supposed to be fairy rings up there, where on Midsummer's Eve, fairies dance around the ancient hill fort. We can't get up there, sadly. But hey. And somewhere here we meet up with the Sussex Border path, the official border route, with the border being just a little way to the west.